about a year ago, you're in class and you're a speech teacher and things are going well. Maybe you got one or two speeches done face to face, and all of a sudden you get an email or some notification from administration or somebody at your university saying that for the next couple of weeks or so, you are going to be online only, that there's going to be no face to face because of this global pandemic that people are learning about, this COVID-19 thing that's going around the globe. And so all of a sudden you're thrown into what I would call a hot mess. You need to learn technology. You need to kind of instruct students and get everybody on the same page to record speeches with the hope that maybe it's one speech or maybe it's a very short term. However, then you get the other email or notification saying, you know what, we are shutting stuff down. We are doing everything virtual from now until the end of the semester. And for me, that happened about spring break, and we ended up half of our semester being online only. So in that time and over the course of 1 year, I've learned a lot. And so today I am here with my colleague. I learned a lot of do's and don'ts. And so today I'm here with my colleague, Annette Davies, and we are here to talk to you about public speaking in the age of social distancing, preparing speeches in an online environment. And so in the light of COVID and the transition to online learning, we are here again to talk about what we've noticed that has worked and what has not worked. So we're going to start out with some introductions. First, I'd like to introduce myself. I am Richard Schutta. I teach and have taught for the last about 6 years in a Midwest university, some universities in the Midwest, teaching primarily the public speech course, though I've taught a couple other communication studies courses. I'm a communication studies instructor, have my master's degree in communication studies, and currently working on my PhD in communication studies in a school that is largely online. My program has been hybrid, so I do have some experience with online learning, which really helped me transition, whereas some of my colleagues struggled a little bit with the transition to the online side. But I've done, with my post-secondary teaching, I have a post-secondary teaching certificate as well, where I was able to learn how to instruct online, which helped me. And so now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Annette Davies, for introduction, and then we will get into our little discussion on the do's and don'ts, the good and the bad.
Thank you, Rick. So I'm so happy to be here with you today. As Rick had mentioned, I'm Annette Davies. I have been a communications instructor for about 9 years now. I received my master's in communications and my PhD in communications as well. That program was primarily online. So I have experience as a student in an online environment and as an instructor in an online environment. I've been teaching online for about 4 years now. And when COVID first happened and the pandemic first hit, we did, like you said, Rick, we also transitioned to online learning, and I was able to see, there was some struggles that happened there. There was some difficulties making that transition. It was, I think, difficult for a lot of us to move all of our classes that were traditionally in seat to an online environment in such a quick setting. We were all getting used to the technology. We were all becoming a little bit more familiar with how to deliver online presentations, both in a public speaking course and other courses as well.
Absolutely.
And as you said, I think in the past year, since we've been primarily online, I've taught, as I mentioned, I've taught a number of classes online before, but I recently started doing public speaking online. And as you said, I've been noticing a lot of those, some of the things, that's worked, some of the things that haven't worked over the last year. And so absolutely, I'm so excited to be here today to kind of talk about our experiences and discuss what we've seen and discuss some ways that we have found in our own research and in our own experience on how to improve delivering online presentations, whether it's for a public speaking class or whether it's for a professional setting, whether it's a job interview, whether it's a academic conference.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's one thing I will just say as well, I'll add to is, it's not only just for schooling, and I've reminded my students of this, and I tell them that this is, yeah, you're being sort of forced into doing these speeches online for social distancing, and my classes have been reduced, so we do reduce class sizes, so the time frame in the class is face-to-face is less, so it's harder to do that, but with social distancing requirements. But recording speeches and having video presentations or online presentations is a way with the global environment and the global economy. And it is something that I remind students like, hey, you're going to have to get this down. And the techniques that you learn here and the things that I point out to you is to make you professionals. And, it's something you are going to have to apply. So don't think of it as such. So,
right. And I don't think that they're, presenting in a virtual environment is necessarily going to be over once the pandemic is over. I think, one of the things that a lot of organizations have really learned is that, or have really, figured out is how to present virtually, and realize that a lot of the different employee connectivity strategies can really be done virtually.
Absolutely. And it's a cost savings too. Businesses looking at bottom line. Universities really, with enrollments fluctuating as much as they are across different parts of the country, universities trying to save a few dollars here and there are, say, limiting travel and stuff. So it's more and more
online programs, academic programs are popping up.
Absolutely.
Public speaking is becoming part of a core requirement in a number of majors.
Absolutely. As it is at my school, it is a required course for students to graduate. So we're here to provide the do's and don'ts.
Yeah. All right. So one of the things, let's start off with practicing, because that is definitely a huge area that I encourage my students to do. Practice, right?
Yes.
Because ideally, and what I tell them, ideally, the more that you practice, the more comfortable you will become with the material, and the less likely that public speaking anxiety or that communication apprehension will affect you.
Absolutely.
It won't, but it might reduce it a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let me jump in here real quick. One thing I do beginning in my class is like introductions. We all do that introduction, introduce yourself. And I always ask students, what are you looking forward to a class and what are you not looking forward to a class or whatever? And everybody's like, and I know students coming into a public speaking class, because I get a lot of the first years, I get a few seniors or whatever, later students, but most of them are first year students coming in, first time in college, and they don't have enough experience public speaking, surprisingly. And they always dread giving the speeches and the fear and the anxiety. So I always tell them, the more you do it, the more you speak, the more you speak, the more you speak, the more you speak, the more comfortable you will become. And I tell them, you have to practice. And that, because I said that practice is really, then what you're doing. You go up there and it's like, oh, I've done this before. And so the practice is really, really a key thing. And it doesn't change whether you're doing it online. I think students get this mindset like, hey, I'm recording this, I can do it. It's not a big deal. It's much easier. I don't have the audience, that personal audience in front of me, but you still have to practice. And for me, I tell them, hey, practice 3 to 5 times minimum.
The whole speech, 3 to 5 times?
3 to 5 times minimum, maybe more. But I also feel like, for those, when you study for a test, you study so much it really doesn't help you, that it probably, for practicing speeches, like if you've practiced it 100 times, that 101st time probably isn't going to really change much. So it's for each individual, I think. Minimum 3 to 5. That's how I look at it.
Get the question, well, how long is enough practice time? And that's a really tough question to answer.
It is.
Right? That's like saying, well, how long is, if I type out a page, how long is that going to take me to say in a speech? That could take 1 minute, that could take 10 minutes. Depends. Pauses, breaths, questions. There's a lot of variance that can come into play here when we're talking about time framing. I always tell my students, look, there's a loose guideline in the field that suggests 1 hour of practice time or preparation time per 1 minute of speech. So if you have a 3-minute speech, then according to this loose guideline, you should be you may want to consider about 3 hours of preparation time. Sure. Now that preparation time includes research, includes writing, includes rehearsing. So it's not just, that they're sitting there for 3 hours repetitively just saying their speech over and over. That's all of, that's the kind of the loose guideline that I always say. Most public speakers find what works for them, and that, what works for one public speaker doesn't necessarily work for another.
Absolutely.
So that loose guideline isn't necessarily it's more of a soft guideline than
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I tell students too, I said, I don't know what goes on in your lives. Everybody has a different background. Some may be parents, some may be are paying for their college and working 2 jobs. Some have other things going on in their lives. And so I say, practicing at least once is better than not practicing at all. Simply put, just do not practice.
Right. Absolutely.
And I say, if you get to 3 to 5, you're probably getting in a good range, and that's just a number that I pull, because I think if you start doing that, so yeah, there is nothing hard and set. Some people very few can naturally just go up there and wing it. I think you do need that practice. And I think, these students who have that anxiety, now there are some who come in with some performing arts background and they have their techniques. And I say, use that technique.
Absolutely.
But I also tell them too, that performing and giving a speech are really 2 different things. I don't want you to think of it as a performance. You can use the techniques. But, again, you're exactly right. Everybody has their own way of doing things, their own time. Some can practice like twice. Some can practice, say, using your general rule. Some can practice for 3 hours or 6 hours, whatever it takes to do, or 1 hour for, what did you say, 1 hour for every minute. So maybe some can practice 7 hours, take all that time and be good. So yeah, it is very loose, but they have to practice. Now with the practicing, how do you tell students to practice? That's what I mean by, do you like ask them to record it, do the mirror thing?
I do. So I always, even before the pandemic hit, I always recommended that they use, their phones, or they use something to record themselves and then go back and watch the playback of that recording and conduct kind of a self-analysis here. So and I, now that we're transitioning more to online environments, and public speaking classes are becoming more and more online, and we see this as really becoming more prevalent in the future, even after the pandemic's over. I really, really do encourage that, and not just practicing recording on your phone. If you're going to be presenting via Zoom, see if you can contact a friend on Zoom and practice your speech while you are Zooming with them. You want to see how you look on camera, how you move on camera, pay attention to your eye contact on camera, which are all things we're going to kind of get into a little bit later on in this podcast. But from a practice standpoint, I would say if you're doing a virtual presentation, the best way to practice, if we're talking about practice methodology, is to practice with and on the technology that you plan on presenting on. Absolutely.
No, I am 10,000% in agreement. And one of the things I do is, when we went to the transition, is I created a module, a practice speech module. And I told students, use this module throughout the semester, practice your speeches, practice different things. I don't say you have to submit your final or your full speech. If you want to practice, you want to try a new technique, you want to check your lighting out, record a minute of just anything. You could just recite the newspaper, just a minute of something, and upload it to this video. And then you can ask me to look at it, or you can ask a peer to look at it, or you can go back and look at it. Submit your practice speeches, get my feedback as well, but practice using this technology, practice uploading, because that's the one thing I found is the uploading of, students struggle with that technology and the uploading. And how many times I put the instructions out there and walk through it. Come speech time, I would always get these emails like, hey, I need an extension, or they would not load their speeches properly. And I do have that module there to practice the technology if they want to try stuff. Check your sound, things that we're going to talk about here.
Absolutely.
Going forward, but they have to, taking advantage.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I just want to speak to what you had said about the mirror concept of practicing. To me, I don't discourage students from practicing in front of the mirror. Like I said, for some people, practicing in front of a mirror can be really beneficial. For me, I know myself well enough to know that I cannot rehearse in front of a mirror. I get way too distracted. I'll stop my speech. I'll pick a line again. I'll look around my bathroom mirror. I'll realize I'm low on toothpaste. I need toothpaste.
Because all your toothpaste is on the mirror, right?
Yes, I have to pluck my eyebrows. There's always something. There's always a huge distraction going on.
Absolutely.
So for me, and that's one of the benefits I find about recording. With the technology, is that it sort of forces you to run through the entire speech, or at least, the goal that you set for
Yeah,
yourself. It's
and you
not
get to
as distracting as something like the mirror, where you can easily start and stop.
yeah, and you get to see, and you get to hear what your students are going to hear. And I always
Yeah.
tell students when we talk about different lessons that there are things, as a speaker, there's things you may not notice you're doing, but your audience will notice some of those nonverbal distraction things. And if you record it and play it back, you get to see what your audience is going to see. And you get to hear what your audience is going to hear. And it's always tough. I always say it's always tough to listen to yourself again. It's always tough to practice in front of friends, close friends or family, but they always give you the best feedback too.
Yeah.
And you noticing yourself and the things that you are doing and identifying, but definitely don't skip the practice. And I think I agree with the mirror thing too. I never use it, recording it, or in the past when we, without the social distancing and face to face, pull in a few of your roommates or whatever and record practice your speech in front of them. But with the online environment, I think the practicing with the recording, making sure things work, testing sound, all of that is really, really important.
Yeah.
So now that so let's say we're walking through this, we've recorded we've written our speech, we've researched our speech, you are ready to deliver it, maybe you've practiced it, and you're sitting down and you're social distance, your university, like a lot of my students live in the dorms, so they don't have a lot of places to go on campus. What is the environment that you look forward to? Do you have issues with environment, or what are the things that you've seen? Maybe tell me some good, maybe tell me some bad that you've seen in some of these speeches over the course of a year, because I'll tell you, I've seen some pretty, I want to chuckle. I've seen people delivering from a bed. I've seen some some pretty dark environments. I've like the lighting. I've seen people that have very
bad
busy
sound quality is
bad sound quality. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Some very busy backgrounds.
Yeah.
So, Annette, why don't you go ahead and tell me what you've seen, and then I can kind of fill in my.
Yeah. So I agree with you. Again, I think a lot of us were thrown into this a year ago, and so we were scrambling to try to find the best environment to deliver these presentations. One of the things I always tell my students is, yes, even though it's a public speaking class, public speaking is in many cases a required skill for a lot of industries, and is really important to the job force, regardless of the industry that you're in.
If you actually look at job descriptions, I've taught a business communication class in the past, but if you look at a job description, what are those top skills? Like when you look at the skills, required skills, what are the top two? Written and oral communication. It's something with communication. So
Absolutely.
This is the skill that will get you the job. You don't have to have the hard skills like, hey, I can go in and program a computer. You can learn that on the job. But if you can't communicate and sell yourself,
right.
And
that's what I tell my students, that even though this is a public speaking course, you want to think about this as if this were a professional setting. I want them to be prepared to go out into the workforce to say, okay, I know how to deliver a presentation in a professional setting. I know what to say. I know what to do. I know how to create this conducive environment, for these online presentations. Or if we're back in person, then that as well, that they also understand how to deliver speeches in person. So, there's different suggestions I've seen, in some of the readings that I've been doing and some of the literature that I've been doing in my own research to try to figure out what works. I've seen different suggestions on what a conducive environment for a virtual presentation looks like. I've seen suggestions for people that say, for some authors or professionals that say you should, sit 3 to 4 feet from a wall. Some of them say you should, have the rule of threes, which says, the rule of threes is kind of this interior design rule that says, like 3 vases or 3 books or some sort of 3 candles, some sort of set of threes is visually appealing to the eye. So if you put that in the background, it creates a little bit of texture, and a visual appeal. The thing that I would say is to my students that posed this question to me, they may not, and this is not just students, this may go for anybody, maybe you don't have a private office that, where you can conduct a virtual presentation. So, maybe you don't have, a huge bookshelf lined with all of these books, or, maybe you don't have these beautiful, paintings or plants that you could use. If you can, great, but not everybody has that to, to their advantage. So then the question becomes, if you can't kind of create this somewhat, professional looking background with a nice picture or a nice plant or three nice candles or a bookshelf or something, what do you do? What do you advise students to do in that situation?
In my case, because I tell students, like, you're in college, and I'm going to kind of tie two things together: background and dress a little bit, and we can go back and elaborate a little
Sure.
bit on dress,
Yeah.
because I know a lot of instructors may say, what, when you do speeches, you have to dress up. And I tell students, because a lot of my students are coming from, say, art classes or hands-on classes, that the don't worry about that. But, and this is the same thing with the background, is like you don't have a lot of choice. If you live in the dorms, you don't have a lot of choice on what you can do. You're very limited, and especially if campus is very restricted on movement and where people can be. And so I say, be mindful of what you're doing now in class is not going to be the same. So I would instruct them on what you told us with the rules and all of that. Have something in the background. Don't have your political flags, and don't have a lot of busyness. Keep all that personal stuff. Maybe just a picture that's not overly colorful, very neutral colors. You don't want super bright colors. If you are giving a professional environment, that you're going to have to figure something out. But for my class, I give a little bit of leeway. And I'll maybe note, things. So yeah, it's more of like, hey, be mindful of this. Be mindful of this in the future, because they are kind of restricted. But I would agree with you that, have something in the background. But I've seen students who have their very political, whether it was candidate A or candidate B for president, in the background. I would say, don't have that. Don't have your, Sports Illustrated stuff up there, or don't have your, just stuff that would really cause someone in a professional environment to look at that and subconsciously maybe make a decision based on you as a candidate if you're applying for a job. So
Sure.
Very neutral,
More of a neutral, yeah, absolutely. More of a
like,
neutral,
we're like
muted background.
Yeah, like I'm looking at our backgrounds, which you won't see because this will be an audio, but both of us have very good backgrounds, very limited amount of stuff. We're not sitting too close to the visuals in the background, and so if you can get a painting or a picture that's just very neutral in color, and you're a few feet away from it, so you're not right on top of it, because it's all about what is the focus,
right?
And it's always about the speaker. It's the speaker is the focus.
That's true.
And so the more you have in the background, the distracting. Now, I've also seen students who have delivered in, I don't know if it's their laundry room area or a game area in their dorms, and it really looks like a prison. It's just a bunch of white walls, and it's very boring. And that actually becomes a distraction to me too. That's like, okay, yes, here's that speaker, but there's nothing there to give it contrast.
That depth, that, the texture.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it's like I can't tell them, like, you have to go and find a picture and pin it to the wall, because they are limited. And, if they have roommates, their roommates might have other stuff going on. So it's that balance when they're as instructors or as students that we might not have as much leeway, but I do instruct them on what to look for into preparing them for that professional environment, that professional presentation in the future. Now, since we are talking about backgrounds, what do you think about blurred backgrounds? Do you have any thoughts on that, Annette?
The virtual backgrounds?
Yeah, the virtual backgrounds, the blurred background. I mean, different programs. I know there's another recording program out there that my school uses that does have it. I don't know if others have that or not.
They do. And so I know exactly, there's different programs that offer different virtual backgrounds, and some of them are very elaborate backgrounds. It looks like it can make you look like you're in a meadow, or it can make you look like you're in outer space with comets, shooting behind your head. So, I understand why, and this is something that we've talked about, other colleagues and myself, we've talked about before, should we allow students virtual backgrounds? Some students are may be uncomfortable showing their home environment or their living environment on camera, so they prefer to use a virtual background, which I completely understand. The only thing I would say is if you're going to use a virtual background, to make sure it's not busy and moving, like, when you're those backgrounds where you're in outer space and there's, stars shooting behind your head, that can be very, very distracting.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is if you use a virtual background, that's perfectly okay. But I still would, as a backup plan, make sure you are still in a professional, somewhat, the environment around you when you're filming this or recording this or when you're presenting, that it still it still follows that conducive environment that we had talked about. Because I have seen presentations where people are using virtual backgrounds and there's a glitch in the system and the virtual background cuts out and then you just see their actual environment behind them.
You got their kids jumping on their bed in their diapers or something going crazy,
Yeah. Right. Well, that's that. So you got to be prepared for that. If you're going to use that virtual background, technology is not 100%, and
Absolutely.
sometimes things can go wrong. So I would say that if you're going to do it, then use the virtual background. Try aim for something that's not moving. That's a little bit less distracting. Some of them have just kind of solid backgrounds, which I think are fine.
Yeah, I would,
And
if it were me, I think the blurred background of the ones I've seen, and I'm trying to think of my own experiences because I've used these sort of in department meetings and people in other meetings have used them. I think if at possible, I think the blurred background is the safest, just because it's not too busy to me. I've seen other, because you know, it's one of those, I guess, judgment, like what are you going to, you'd have to play through them, and I think different ones could work. I'm just trying to think of the program that we've used and the different ones that I've seen, and to me they all seem a little busy and they end up being more distracting.
yeah.
From my own experience. Now different programs might have different ones that work better. I would say, just from my experience, the blurred background is probably the safest.
Mm-hmm. I've never seen a blurred background on the programs we use, so
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, so the one program that we have at my school that we do a lot of our department meetings and virtual meetings does have a blurred background. It just blurs everything out, so it just blocks it. Where I've seen other ones, it's like you're out in, Italy somewhere. It's kind of got that Italian feel to it. Or you mentioned the meadow. Another one I've seen, it's got like this very white open. I'm not a artist, so I don't know the proper Art Deco or whatever proper term, but it's just this white open studio space.
Right.
And it just seems too much to me.
Yeah,
So
I would say that to not, if you're going to use them, make sure you aim for ones that's a little bit more neutral, a little bit more muted, and not as busy. That would be.
And I would recommend asking people. People
Absolutely.
around you, like if you do have coworkers around you, or if you get somebody, if you can get somebody or instructor, if you want to use these, reach out to your instructor. I mean, we're there. That's where we're there to help you, instruct you on, make these most professional. Reach out to us and say, what does this background look like? What do you think of this background? We can tell you, no, you think this is too busy, or this virtual background is too much. Maybe change different ones.
Right.
I mean, right away, if they jump up there like, hey, what do you think of this? And it's like Star Wars going on in the background, and they got sound effects going. I'm like, no.
It's, or like the Manhattan street, sometimes the Manhattan streets background where it's like, cars honking in the background.
Yeah,
so,
too much there.
Can we talk about lighting for a minute? Because that is something that I have seen with some virtual presentations. The lighting in some cases have been so dark, it's difficult to see people. And as public speaking instructors and as communication professionals, that's one of the things we really look to in order to perceive and understand messages, facial expressions, hand gestures. So when that lighting in virtual presentations are off, that can really, that really impacts our ability to, the audience or colleagues' ability to understand a message. So what are your tips for lighting?
Yeah, for lighting, I don't know if it's really specific tips. Because again, a lot of it's based on where students are able to deliver their speeches, but I do point out, like, hey, if they have a window, try to close their blinds. Try to maybe put the lights in front of them. Overhead lights tend to create a glare. Windows, don't sit with the window behind you.
Yes.
Because going back to that one area where I've noticed students in their dorms that looks kind of like a prison is very empty, is they have like a window that sits behind them and there's that glare, and it creates, and that becomes the focus again. It's kind of like those nonverbal distractions in class, like people playing with their hair or whatever. It becomes the distraction. And so when the lighting is poor, if it's next to you or maybe right behind you, and your computer camera picks up on that and it magnifies it, it really magnifies it. All of a sudden, it's not the speaker you're looking at, it's that glow off of the speaker. And both of us wear glasses. That becomes the other problem, is that light hits that glasses and it creates that glare, and all of a sudden it's like you can't focus on the eye contact, you can't judge the eye contact, you can't judge because your eyes draw in. So I had a student, it was probably last year, as we were kind of learning all this and going through this and learning the technology, had such a glare off their glasses that it really became the only thing I could focus on. And it's so memorable. It's still ingrained into my brain. So, you know, you have to play with it. You have to practice.
You do. You do. And sometimes if you take a lamp and you like move a lamp next to or just behind your computer screen, that can help cut down on the glare on the glasses. Also, sometimes keeping your chin down a little bit more, as opposed to keeping like your head, the more your head goes up, sometimes that light reflects off of those glasses more than when your chin is down. And you know, that is something that I have noticed too, that there can be a big glare on those glasses. And sometimes you can almost see what's on somebody's computer screen if they're close enough to their camera lens and the glare is being picked up. Their glasses have a glare to them. You can see the reflection from their computer screen.
I've had students who have had points docked because they're supposed to deliver from an outline versus a written full manuscript, where their glasses, the glare off the glasses has given it away. Is given it away. But yeah, it's those things, that you really, again, it all goes back to the focus should be you, the speaker, and not the lighting, the glare. You know, we need to see you. And if you are giving an interview, they want to see you, the person. They don't want to see that glare. And how does it, and you have to always ask that question, how does this look to that person on the other end? If I'm making $1 million contract pitch, what is it how does this appearance look? Because appearance, you know, that appearance sells, you know, first appearances are
absolutely. And you raise a really good point about that. And you kind of had mentioned it earlier, which I did want to go back to, about clothing and attire. So I noticed that you had said that you don't make your students wear professional attire. I don't either, because it's just, you know, it's difficult in that setting. Like you said, some of my students, you know, might come from art classes or sports. And so that's difficult to, you know, come in a full, you know, suit or, you know, business clothing or something. I do recommend it.
Oh, I do too. I say, you know what, I recommend it. You know, you'll feel, helps with your confidence.
Absolutely. And if you're home, you know, if you're home delivering speeches, or you're about to present virtually, particularly if it's a professional setting, I absolutely stand by that and recommend that professional attire. There have been some studies that have even looked at how clothing can impact the cognitive psychological process, and people tend to you know, really feel more confident when they, in some cases, may feel more confident when they actually have that professional attire on, as opposed to, you know, sweatpants and a sweatshirt or something.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it definitely, and it really, for me, because I do have a lot of students who are doing various projects, and a little bit more this year because we did do the hybrid. So students are doing some face-to-face things that I would not, if we were doing speeches, I would not expect them to, because a lot of them are doing a lot of dealing with ink and paint, construction stuff that I can't expect them to carry clothes around. You know, I have to assume that they're coming from these other classes, and they have to run to another class as well. But I make it very specific. I very specifically tell them that what you do in this class, you do not want to be doing when you are giving a job interview. You have to dress up. You have to, very conservative clothing, colors. Now, it's because it is a fundamental course, I don't go into as much detail as I did maybe in my business professional communication courses, but I do mention, you know, conservative clothing, good solid colors. What are your thoughts on that? I know you've done a little bit more.
So I used to be involved in more of like the performing arts, film production, before I got into academia. So, you know, some of some of what I tell my students really stems from that experience. We used to tell cast or actors or people that were in front of the camera, if there are certain colors that look good on camera and there are certain colors that don't look good on camera. Things like colors like black, white, and anything striped tends to not striped because it can roll on camera and it kind of looks like it's moving. The colors that tend to look a little bit better on camera are like blues, yellows, purples, reds, greens, depending on if you're using a green screen, then you can't use greens, but usually in most cases you're not. So usually, those primary colors or bright colors tend to look a little bit better on camera. I would also advise my students to be aware of things like that make a lot of noise, because in a lot of these virtual programs, the microphones are really sensitive. So if you have, earrings that are long and dangly and maybe they make a lot of noise, or if you have a necklace or a string of bracelets or something that are making a lot of noise, when you're delivering a speech face to face, it might not be that it might not impact the audio quality that much, but sometimes in virtual presentations, it absolutely can, because these mics, you're so much closer to the mic, and these mics really can pick up a lot of that. So I would tell them to sort of be leery of that jewelry that you're wearing on camera. Also, jewelry. We talked about glasses having a glare. Jewelry, in much of the same way, can also have a glare.
Absolutely.
So that's the other reason why, practicing, going back to what we were first saying at the start of our conversation, practicing with the technology, put on, do that dress rehearsal, put on what you plan on wearing for that presentation, put on the jewelry, put on the clothing, see how it looks, Zoom with a friend or use use the software program you're going to be using to talk to a colleague or a classmate and examine how it looks before actually presenting.
Absolutely. No, I agree there.
So how about the standing versus sitting debate? Because I know you and I have talked about this in the past, right?
Yeah, we disagree. We disagree on something, Annette. We disagree on something. We agree usually on like 99.9%, but we disagree on this one. Yeah. When it comes to recording speeches, I am all about sitting, and here's why. Now, I'm okay with the people standing, but the problem is what I've noticed, and this was something last year when I didn't really give instructions, but then this year I said specifically, or I made recommendations. Here's what I would like, is if you are standing, students don't have the proper microphones, or they don't set up they don't have the proper setup. So what I end up getting is a very difficult, hard to hear speech, and they are standing really far back that it seems like they're so far back, it's hard to really judge a lot of it, but it really comes down to being able to hear them. So I recommend students sit for these speeches, because I think a lot of times in these speeches you'll be doing in your professional environments, you'll probably be sitting anyways, and you get the better sound quality. You sound there versus very distant. There does run into some other issues that we'll talk about here in a moment when you're sitting versus standing, but I'm really about, I think sitting is okay. I'm fine with sitting there. If students want to stand, they have to, again, go to the practice. What does it sound like? Do they have a good microphone? Can they pick up their sound quality?
Yeah. So I've seen it both ways. I think the vast majority of my students sit, but I have seen several of them that stand. I don't discourage them from standing. Some people are just more comfortable standing. Some people find when they stand, they have, they're a little bit more animated. They have a little bit more energy. So if, and as I said earlier, what works for some speakers don't always work. What works for one speaker may not work for another. Right. So sometimes it's really just a matter of personal preference.
Yeah, but
here's what I would say to anyone that's considering the, sit or not to sit debate. If you're going to stand, the same rules apply to standing as sitting. So normally when you're sitting, I would tell people to sit 3 or 4 feet from the camera to make sure that you are positioned in the center of the camera, to make sure that we can see, there's a little room on the top of your head that we can, it cuts off maybe the camera cuts off maybe at your rib cage, so that we can see, your hand gestures, we can see your facial expressions. I would say the same rules apply in a standing setting. that if you're going to stand, make sure you have an ability to pick that laptop or that computer up to a comfortable level. You don't want to be standing and looking down at the computer. You also don't want
Yes.
to be standing 10 feet away from the computer. I would say if that's what you prefer, then I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, I think one of the things I notice in students when they stand is they feel like then they are delivering, like they're trying to replicate the in-class experience, which is not the case. You know, all of a sudden they're moving and they're pacing side to side, they're adding movement, or maybe their eye contact starts to shift side to side, which is not the case. You know, and I don't want to maybe elaborate a little bit more on this, but it really, you have to drive into students, and I drive into students, is like your audience is through the camera. You're not delivering as if your audience is physically there, where you do have to look around in different spots. So I think that becomes a problem when they're standing, is they get that sense of like, oh, I'm standing, so I need to be doing this movement that we're being taught that if we are giving a speech on stage or in front of an audience that we need to be doing, and they try to build that in. Because it's almost every student I see who stands, they're doing that. They're turning their eye contact around when it's like really there. So I don't know. I think sitting helps drive it home that your audience is in front of you. It's that camera that's right in front of you. So that's something that I notice when my students have stood, and I have to tell them, no, your audience is in front of you. You have to remember that. So I think sitting helps drive, focus in on where your audience is.
Yeah, the eye contact, oh, I completely agree with you. I think the eye contact, it needs to be in a virtual presentation, it needs to be delivered to the camera lens. And in some cases, it can be difficult to just continue to look at that small black dot at the top of your screen.
Especially if you're doing like what we're, like when you're using a couple programs where the audience is there and you can see them, where I know when you're recording speeches, you don't really see the audience, because I don't do synchronous speeches. So when you are recording it, it might be a little bit easier, but in a session where you do have a team meeting, or, a department meeting or whatever, and your audience is there, you want to look at your audience, but then your eye contact moves away, whereas it's still that camera. Your camera is still where their eyes.
Right. I would tell students that sometimes I advise them to put like a Post-it or something right on top of the camera lens, because it gives you a wider point of focus rather than sort of just that small black dot at the top of your screen. If you put like a large pink Post-it, not over the camera lens, obviously, but just above it, it gives you, a wider point to focus on.
That's a great point. I'll have to try that. What I usually tell my students, well, a couple things I tell my students. Number one, don't have your script on the screen.
Yes, because the glare on the glasses.
Glare on the glasses. But then when it comes to eye contact, and they're looking at the screen, there's this distance. It becomes zombie-like. It's like they're looking through you and they're not looking at you.
Right.
And a lot of students the last year and a half or last year that we've been doing sort of more virtual speeches have lost points on their speech evaluations because, yeah, technically they are sort of making eye contact, because they're not looking away. They are looking at the computer screen, but they're not looking at the audience. They need to be looking at the audience, not what's on their screen. So what I tell students is I'd rather have their notes, and I'm going to take your advice, Annette, and have them maybe like Post-its or something up front so they can but to have their notes in front of them, not off to the side, off to the side, even if it's very close, with your computer on your computer desk off to the side, directly in front of you, right on your keyboard. So I'd rather have them look down and then look back up. I think it's a more natural, because you're gonna have to refer to your notes. I mean, that's just, I allow them to use the notes. I don't require they memorize their speeches. So I'd rather have them look down and then back up at their audience and keep with the main focus on the audience, not reading their notes.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell them to print it as well. Sometimes if you have, a hard copy in front of you, one of the things that you can do too is you can hold it just to the right or to the left of the camera lens, and it's then you only have a small movement between the camera lens and the
absolutely
right in front of you. It's better than kind of having it down, like on the keyboard or down on your lap, because then your head drops down.
That's a good
point.
When
your head drops down in a virtual presentation, it can skew the audio. It also skews the eye contact. I mean, we would advise that in both if you were delivering face-to-face or virtual.
Right. Yeah. The thing with having it like your notes set to the side, like I have a notepad next to me. If this were, you were looking at my face and I had to refer to my notes, then all of a sudden you turn away, and I'm going to stick there a lot longer than even if glance down, and I'm experienced public speaker, so I can glance down and look back up, very subtle. You might see a small dip. I know students, they kind of want to really dip down. So yeah.
Yeah. How about how do you, so now that we're talking about this, digital technology, and again, there's a bunch of different programs out there that particularly we've seen, an increase in them since the pandemic hit. How do you recommend students optimize digital technology?
I'm fortunate enough to have a school that
Or
has a,
anyone, professionals for.
oh yeah. There's a few things, obviously the practice comes in. If you know you're going to be doing a lot of these, and say you work in industry, invest in good quality material. But for students, obviously you're kind of given what you're given. And instructors, we're given what we're given. So we have a program at my school that we use that I actually like, and I recommend my students use it. I don't require it, but I may, if we continue with recorded speeches, use, because this particular program allows for the student. And so I require visual aids for 3 of my 4 speeches. And this program really is great because I can split my screen half and half and have half visual aid, half student. There are other programs out there, a lot of the more common ones that people use for meetings, whereas you get the visual aid, you share your screen, and all of a sudden the speaker is this little box on the corner. And I don't know if there's functionality where it can flip, where you can see the speaker versus the presentation aid. So you end up losing one or the other. When I grade speeches, I want to see both, and if I had the choice, obviously the speaker is what I prioritize for public speaking, my fundamentals course. Now, in some business presentations, maybe the visual aid is more important. Because, if you are presenting a contract and you have PowerPoints and you're showing data, that might be to the team more important. But for our courses, for online learning, I need to see both. Are students incorporating a visual aid? What's on that visual aid? And I need to be able to grade and evaluate the speaker's movements, eye contact, body language, all of that. So I need to be able to see both. And so if possible, if you have a program that does that,
I agree.
That's what I recommend.
Not every program does that. Sometimes
right.
One over the other, either the speaker or the presentation. So
absolutely. So I guess I say I'm lucky. I'm lucky to have that technology.
That's great, because it really, I always tell my students, it's not just a matter of what you say, it's also how you say it. And by that, I mean, their verbal controls, their nonverbal controls, eye contact, hand gestures, facial expressions, body posture.
There's a great TED talk out there by Richard Green, who has analyzed speeches for like 30 some years. He talks about the 7 secrets of the greatest speakers in history. And throughout his 7 secrets, one of his secrets is that your voice, or the words you use, simply the words you use, only accounts for 7% of the impact of a speech. It's the body language and tone of voice that really have that greater impact. And so we need to be able to see that. And so like I say, I am lucky to have this particular program that we use where we can see both, and I know a lot of the more common ones, it's a little bit more difficult.
It is. That's not always an option on all of the technology. And I would say if it is an option, then split equally. But in some of the more well-known programs, that might not usually.
What do you prefer if that's the case? Because I think in our conversation, you said you have the programs you have.
You don't have the ability to split equally.
Yes. So what do you prefer?
Students have the preference to favor one over the other. And I let them really do what they're more comfortable with. But as a public speaking instructor, they send me the PowerPoint notes. So I am able to grade the notes at a later time after they're done delivering the speech. So if they had the option, to favor one over the other, I would say to put themselves, the primary point of focus, and the visual aid, the secondary point of focus. However, if this were a business setting or a corporate setting or a conference where you don't always have access to the notes afterwards, I would say that flips around. I would say to favor the visual aid and then favor this, and then make the speaker the secondary point of focus. So I really, in that situation where you don't have the option, I think it really depends on the situation.
I agree. What about sound quality? Because that's another thing that I've found that not all computers pick up sound quality equally. And, um, and that's something that I struggle with. I get a lot of recordings that are staticky, and I have to be careful because, again, I can't assume students can go out there and spend even $25 on recording equipment. But what are your thoughts on that? I mean, what is it?
Yeah. So this can be a problem because it impacts our ability to hear the speaker. And if we can't hear what they're saying, that really
Yeah,
impacts our ability to kind of understand that message. So I would say the first thing I would do before you present, and both in the practice, I would say just sit in the room for 15, 20 seconds and just listen to the noises in the room in quiet. See, what are the natural noises? Do you hear the traffic outside? Do you hear the hum of the air conditioner? Do you hear the dishwasher in the background?
do you have roommates running around? Do you have like a party that's going on two dorms down?
Right.
Or do you have your
Exactly. Right. I mean, sometimes you can't control that. If you have, living in a dorm, there's people in the hallway, or you
right?
have dogs at home. Sometimes some things are, you may not be able to control every single
Well,
sound,
absolutely.
but certainly trying to mitigate any noise distractions ahead of time is definitely something I would advise.
Yeah. I mean, and I do tell students, hey, if you have a headset, use it.
Yeah.
I don't think even if you were in business, anybody's going to complain that you're using a headset with a microphone. I don't think anybody's going to complain about that, and it actually will help you sound better. I know we've done recordings in the past where I've went back and listened to them like, no, I need to get my headset. I need to get my headset because it sounds like I'm calling into a radio talk show because it sounds
Right.
very
Right.
not good. It
Yeah.
doesn't sound good.
If
So
you have that ability,
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And again, we can't force
I
students, but I think a lot of schools too, you may want to check. A lot of schools may have equipment to rent out. And this kind of goes in, I'm going to tie this in with video quality too. If your computer camera isn't the greatest, I know my school does rent out uh, monitor cameras. Now you want to test it because when I've stopped using, I rented one for my office, but I stopped using it because I realized the way my computer is placed on my desk, I pick up my file cabinet that's sitting above it, and there's not much I can do I mean, I probably could take it off the docking station, but I'm kind of lazy and it's on the docking station. So I just stopped using it. But check with your schools, find out if they do have equipment that they can rent out or loan you for a short period of time to really, because you want to go into these speeches, even if it's a class, even if you dislike public speaking, and majority of the world, over 50% of the world dislikes public speaking to the point of not, turning down public speaking opportunities. We get, as instructors, we get that, but try to think of this in the mindset of you're doing this to better yourself for the future. So every speech you do what you can. Go and ask your technology resources on your campus. Do you have a headset or a microphone that I can plug into my computer to pick up my audio quality
I
there?
would also say to do your research ahead of time and consider the programs that you're using. Some of the more well-known programs like Zoom, they have features that, and I don't specifically use these features, so I couldn't speak to them directly. But some of these more well-known programs have features where you can ahead of time you can help you can try to control the audio and the video, and you can adjust some of those settings accordingly. So definitely, knowing which program you're using ahead of time and looking into, are there ways that you can optimize the video and sound quality prior to presenting your presentation?
Yeah.
Would also be another thing that I would advise.
Yeah. Like, again, going back to what we were talking about in practice, if any of my students were ever listening to this podcast, or anybody, I think as instructors, setting up practice modules in your learning systems, or having a place where students can submit practice things so they can test stuff out. And now whether they take advantage of that or not, that's up to the students. But I tell students, hey, practice this stuff, send it to me, let me listen to it, let me get my feedback, even if it's just a 30-second sound clip, or if it's your full speech in advance, you want me to pick out these things so you can go back and fix them. you have to try it. You can't just rely on it, because we know, we've worked with technology enough. There's enough research out there to know that technology is going to guarantee to fail. It's like taxes and death. It is going to happen.
Yeah.
You can give 100 speeches and you could be on that 101st speech. Like, I've never had any issues. That 101st speech is going to hit you.
Right.
So you have to have that back. You have to practice with it. You have to have that backup plan, test it out, research in advance. You have to put the time and effort into it. Just like anything else, you have to put the time and effort and know what to do in case technology goes out, and have that backup plan.
So yeah, I think just some of the key takeaways from today, Rick, what would you just, wrapping things up here, what would be your key takeaways that you would advise, public speaking instructors or any professionals that are considering virtual presentations?
Yeah, one of the things I think we mentioned, I'm going to throw it into key takeaways, but when you are presenting your speeches, this kind of goes into background environment. Don't be lazy. Even if you're a student, don't be delivering, laying on your couch, doing the selfie thing with your computer or your phone. I guess the biggest key takeaway is consider this. I always tell students, this class, think of my class as you are on the job. And it comes to deadlines, quality of work, expectations. So the key takeaway for me is practice, plan, prepare, anticipate. Don't wait to the last minute on your deadlines. Anticipate your technology is not going to work. Anticipate when you are loading your say you record your speeches and you're loading it into the generic Dropbox that you have, or wherever you're submitting your speech, the assignment, that your technology, the internet's going to go out. Anticipate all of those different environments. That's another thing. I don't think we brought that up.
Plan for how to deal with them.
Yeah, I think that's something we didn't actually bring up specifically, but different people live in different areas, so some people were on campus and they were sort of hunkered down in their dorms. Others decided to do almost all virtual learning. Know your internet. Know the quality of your internet. Not all internet quality is equal.
Right. And I've seen that happen before where
yeah,
cuts out or something, and
absolutely. So I think that's something we forgot to mention. So that's another key takeaway too, is just knowing your technology, practicing it, using it, asking questions. I think as instructors, we've gotten thrown into this, but I think we can pick up on it pretty quick, and we play around and we kind of know what we're expecting. We get that picture in our mind, kind of drawing my inner Walter Lippmann here, that picture in my mind, vision in our heads. Yeah. The visions in our head of what we're expecting. So ask your instructors. Don't think you know everything. It's okay to ask questions. I want students to ask questions. I tell students, hey, I want to see your practice videos. I want to give you that feedback before you submit the final thing, because I want you to do the best and pick those things out. So I think the key takeaway is just really, really the practice. And if you do get evaluations from your instructors that says, hey, here's what I noticed, the glare, the lighting, please take that into consideration and practice and work that into your next speeches.
Absolutely.
So Annette, what about your key takeaways?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really summarized everything really, really well. The practicing, I can't stress that enough. And especially because we're talking about virtual presentations, practicing with the technology that you plan on presenting, practicing in the attire you plan on presenting. So
with your visual aids.
With your visual aids, basically recreate the speech in its entirety. And present that speech, see what it looks like, see what it sounds like, see how your attire looks, see how your jewelry looks, see with that lighting. Practice at the same time. If you're going to deliver that speech at noon, practice it at noon a couple days in advance, so you can see what that lighting looks like. Now that obviously that could change, depending on a variety of factors. But
oh, go ahead. No, I'm sorry.
Please.
Oh, I happened to think of something as you were talking about this. One of the things that students, and I may be jumping back, I apologize for this, but one of the things that I know students tend to do is like, they feel like, okay, they can record it, so they can record it over and over. But what is your thoughts about, I tell students they have to do it in one take. And I take a huge amount of points off evaluations if I see that they're stopping and starting and there's that really clear glitch, that skip. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, are you kind of do it one and done? I mean, I don't care how many times they record it up to, but they have to submit the one take.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay.
One take, because when you're presenting in, face to face, you don't have that ability
Sure.
to, stop, take a break, start over, repeat. So yes, I would say in the same way that you have to go through the entire speech when you're face to face, it's the same idea in a virtual presentation, even if you're recording it.
Absolutely. Okay. That just jumped into my mind. I thought about it as one of the things that I would have added.
That's not to say that you can't record it a couple times and, see which take that you prefer. That's fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you don't want to record the introduction and then, edit it and go back and then record the body of the speech, and then 2 days later record because
you're wearing red one day and blue the next
exactly.
day, and all of a sudden it's
you can see the jump cut that happens.
I do.
Or the light changes, or it's kind of a giveaway in that.
I see a student. I literally saw a student put on had their cursor over the start and stop button and click it, and the times didn't match up, and so it was too bad because it was a pretty.
We know when students do that. So I would say no. That if you're pre-recording and you want to try a couple takes and then you want to pick and choose which take you think looks the best and submit that, that's fine. But introduction, body, conclusion has to go straight through.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think we covered everything. And so, really it comes down to the practice and working with the technology. It is stressful. I get it. It is stressful for a lot. If you don't, for some instructors who have had no online, they're used to the face-to-face. This is tough for some of us who have done the online. It was an inconvenience. I think it was more the students were stressed out about learning new technology. And, I've learned stuff over the course of a year and, one academic year of things I'm doing different. And every semester I've changed and made more clear. But I think it really comes down to practicing, getting used to it, because it is going to be a very, very, like you mentioned back in the beginning, this isn't going away. We are going to be using video recording, video presentations. I mean, they're already there. And I remember one of the first video interviews I did and how it was there was that delay, and that delay is gone. The technology is catching up. So this is going to be something that we do for cost quality or for cost savings. And it's just something that you need to be a professional at, and students need to,
regardless of the industry.
Yeah, regardless of the industry, and students need to realize, and instructors need to realize that while it might be inconvenience now because it is so new, and we kind of think it in the terms of like, okay, we're being locked down in this global pandemic, we're being forced to do this. We got to get out of that mindset and say this is going to happen regardless, and this is going on, and it has been going on. It's going to be that term that I'm getting sort of sick of saying, but it really is true. It is the new normal. And you are going to have to know this, and it's not every speech is going to be standing in front of front of 200 people or 50 people in an auditorium or on a stage in front of people with a microphone. It is going to be virtual.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so
Rick, this was so much fun. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. I really liked our exchange of ideas. I think
absolutely.
For the most part, we were in agreement. I think we'll agree to disagree on some points here.
I've learned some stuff. I learned some stuff that I'm going to incorporate. Yeah, no, the 3 rule and some other things. The practice time. I'm going to incorporate that into my instruction in the future. So, my students are going to fall out of their chairs when I tell them, okay, for every hour or 1 minute or whatever the statistic was, 1 minute, 1 hour for every 3 minutes or whatever it is.
1 hour for every minute. Again, it's a loose guideline that really just emphasizes that
students don't need to know that's a loose guideline. That's my expectation. I want timesheets.
Oh, that's man, timesheets. That's opening a can of worms.
Yeah. All right, Annette. Well, it's been a pleasure. Always a pleasure working with you, and hopefully we can work together again. Circles, my friend.
Yes, you as well. Take care. Thank you.
You too. Yep. Bye-bye.